Well, speaking of stats, here's some numbers for you when it comes to the goaltending comparison in the Stanley Cup Final. Stuart Skinner going up against Sergei Bobrovsky. Look at the numbers here. Skinner 11-5, Bob 12-5. Goals against average, kind of similar. Give the edge to Bob in a couple of these departments, including save percentage. You can see Stuart Skinner's save percentage, .897. That's actually decent compared to what it was. You go back to round 2, the first 3 games against the Canucks, .793. Actually came out for a game or 2. Calvin Pickard had to come in, kind of pick things up. Skinner back in the net, and it looks like he's got that confidence and has his game back. How do you break down the goaltending match?
Well, exactly what you just said. Skinner's going like that with confidence. The team in front of him sees that confidence. And for me, what I really recognize with Dallas, and Stevie mentioned it, that the Dallas shooters looked like they had their chances and they didn't execute or make their shots. Well, when your goalie looks as big as he does and you're a shooter, even if you're a goal scorer, you think, okay, I got to make a perfect shot. The guy's so big in net, I got to put it in a corner. And I think that played into it a little bit because he looked bigger in the net as this series went on. And he played on his knees a lot, but he found a way to recover and stay in front of the puck. And I got to give him a lot of credit because when you get yanked in a playoff series and you have to deal with that mentally to be able to bounce back and then win a Game 7, and then that confidence, to me, in the Dallas series, that was the difference in the series, how well he played.
Connie, you've seen it before in Chicago, though, right?
Yeah.
And it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it happened with Corey Crawford. And he got yanked early in a series, and he had to come back in, and he was a better goalie because of it. And I look at this, and listen, there's different spotlights on a goalie. When you get pulled in a game towards the end of the game or let's say halfway through a game, and then you start the next game, everyone's watching you. When you get pulled in a series and the other guy comes in and wins the game and then plays well in the next game but they lose, and then you get thrown back in, you're under a huge spotlight, especially in a Canadian market, and that's where he is in Edmonton. He's played very well since that time. So he had an opportunity to reset. He looked back on his game, and I think the team's playing a little bit differently in front of him, too, T. They seem to play a little tighter now because when Pickard came in, they weren't giving up a lot of prime scoring opportunities. I think they took that same mindset with Skinner between the pipes, and they played a little tighter defensively in front of him. And as a result, you mentioned he's a shot blocker. He's just there to, he's a big guy. Even when he's down on his knees, he's covering most of the net. He's there to make that first stop, and the defense have done a really good job taking care of second and third opportunities.
You think about some of the netminders that Sergei Bobrovsky has had to go up against to get to this point in the Eastern Conference. And look, I don't want to say he's been the better goalie in every series, but he certainly hasn't hurt his team. How good has Sergei Bobrovsky been for the Florida Panthers?
He is just such a calming influence back there. And I can tell you, and Tony, you probably had the same experience, whether it was Kelly Rudy when we were the LA Kings. With me, it was Eddie Belfour, the Chicago Blackhawks. You knew you could play on your toes and not have to worry about a cheap goal going in. And that's exactly what Florida does. They play on their toes. They're very aggressive in the offensive zone, sometimes to a fault, but they realize they've got a stopper back there, a world-class stopper. And he's not a huge guy. He's not overly big. I don't think he's even 6 feet 2 inches tall, but he's very athletic. And you see his numbers, and we saw that list of players that he, the other goaltenders that he was up against.
It's the cream of the crop in the NHL.
Sturkin, Swayman, Vasilevsky.
Wow.
He upped them. Not that he played better than them necessarily.
Didn't have to, though, right?
But he didn't have to, and he came out on top, and he just makes the stops he's supposed to make, and that's what you're supposed to do in the playoffs.
Yeah, I feel like in the playoffs, we haven't watched Sergei Bobrovsky and said, ooh, that's one he'd like to have back. Like, he's been steady Eddie, and he makes the timely saves when he needs to most.
He does, and what I think his teammates love about him, he's the hardest worker. He's always first on the ice and last off. He's in the gym. So as a teammate, I think they recognize how much this guy cares and how much he's a hockey player, not just a goalie. And so that they thrive in playing in front of him. And like you said, when they needed the big save, he's there for them.
You know what? I made the mistake once. I was doing a game for Chicago, and he was in Columbus at the time, and I went to talk to him the day of a game. He said, no. I don't talk
It's not happening.
Yeah. He's so focused, and I think the players really feed off of that, too.
Two-time Vezina Trophy winner, too. Active goaltender right now for the Florida Panthers, Sergei Bobrovsky. You guys give him the edge to Florida in net?
Yeah, I'd have to.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Slight edge.
Okay.
I'm a big Skinner fan just with what he looked like in the net versus Dallas.
You don't get to this point
on the way
if you're Edmonton without a good netminder, and Stuart Skinner has certainly been that. How about this, though? Look at this. You've got youth versus experience when it comes to the two coaches here. representing their teams in the Stanley Cup Final. Chris Knobloch taking over the reins early in the regular season for Edmonton, and all he's done is just absolutely put this thing in 8th gear and drive it right to the Stanley Cup Final. And Paul Maurice, who's been a head coach in the NHL since he was 28 years old. Experience versus inexperience. How does this one play out? Let's hear from Maurice on the long layoff between the series.
Same schedule. You want fairness. You know what? In truth, you want both teams healthy. You want both fairly reasonably similar schedules, and away they go. It's probably the perfect amount of time off. You can take a couple of days, then you can push a little bit in the middle and then get ready for the game. So we are as healthy as you can be as a hockey club. Both those guys will be skating full on tomorrow.
Balancing act on, do you want to counter what they have, play to their strengths, or do you want to play to your strengths? So I think for the biggest thing right now is who's playing our best hockey and inserting those guys rather than trying to counter what they have. I don't know how much experience is, beneficial. You can ask the Buffalo Bills how important Super Bowl experience is. But I think the biggest thing is just having confidence to play. And, when our guys are playing their best, they should have a lot of confidence.
I mean, poor Bills fans trying to enjoy their summer
Buffalo
here.
Bills.
Yeah, and they're taking just ricochet shots from the Stanley Cup Final a couple of days ahead of game number 1. How much does coaching this time of year directly impact the outcome of these series? Because that last series, I believe it was Paul Maurice who said, look, at this time of the year, we're such a well-oiled machine. Our guys know what to do. I just sit back and I watch incredible hockey going on. So how do you answer that?
Well, there's still important decisions that need to be made. And one of them for me is McDavid going to try to get away from Barkov and Bennett. And if they do, the third and fourth line of Florida, which I think Maurice is comfortable with those guys being on the ice against them as well. So I think the coach that is going to get his team to settle into the rotation of their players going on the ice regularly will have the best chance to win. But if one team's trying to match and get certain guys on or off the ice against certain players, then I think it goes the other way. So I think it's really important. And I think Paul Maurice's experience and also his confidence of his depth will put him in a better position and not have to worry about matchup.
Yeah, especially with in-game adjustments. Because sometimes, listen, you've played on teams, you just don't have it. And you need a kick in the pants, you need something shaken up. And whether it's sitting a guy or moving a guy up in the lineup or down in the lineup, that sometimes accomplishes it. And that's Paul Maurice, that seems to be his forte. He's just got a great sense of the pulse of his team, who's going, who isn't going, who he should be leaning on. And he just seems like he's really well liked in that dressing room. I mean, to a fault almost. The players absolutely love him. And that doesn't happen very often. Coach has to make some tough decisions. But I look at a guy like Rodriguez who set up that first goal by Bennett. Rodriguez was the GOAT on that overtime goal by the New York Rangers. Lost a draw, lost his man, scores a goal. But he was right back out there, played the same, maybe more minutes the next game. And how does he respond? Well, he sets up basically the game-winning goal. I know they won 3-1, but that goal was a backbreaker by Bennett, and it was all set up by Rodriguez. So those are the kinds of things that Paul Maurice does that the players really appreciate.
Yeah, and we appreciate in the media having him represented because of the press conferences and some of the comments that we get. When you talk about this Oilers team making the Stanley Cup Final, a lot of the spotlight, and deservedly so, is on Connor McDavid and how he needs his name on the cup to kind of solidify his legacy. But how much credit should we be giving to Chris Knobloch and what he has done with this team in that market? And this guy has not missed a beat. He made some bold moves in the playoffs, too, pulling guys in and out of the lineup, making the goaltending change. Everything he's done so far has seemed to work.
And he's done it with great poise and kind of an even-keeled demeanor, which is really unusual for a young coach. Usually you come in and you want to be all emotional and you want to provide energy. And I think what he has done is stabilize the guys. Hey, relax. We're a heck of a hockey team if we play the way we're capable of playing. So I don't think there's ever been panic in him. And I think that has really kind of settled that team down. Because you know what that market's like. Stevie talked about the market in Canada and in Edmonton. He played in Calgary and different markets. It is really difficult. Everything's examined under a microscope, everything that's done. And I think he's been able to keep that team nice and calm through some tough times in this playoffs. Yeah. And obviously having the experience of coaching McDavid prior to coming here to Edmonton has been a huge thing, because I think Connor's taken another level of leadership upon his shoulders with Knobloch behind him.
I think it's trickle-down effect, too, because, I mean, you talk about that microscope. There's been some serious microscope in the playoffs on a guy like Darnell Nurse, right? And every time somebody asks a question in the media, those guys, Connor's like, I will take this one. I'll answer that one. Same thing with Knobloch. Like, these guys, never too high, never too low, it seems like.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that with Connor McDavid. Some people in the press thought that he got that job because he coached Connor McDavid, because Connor McDavid wanted him as coach. I think he's really proved his worth. And you mentioned some of the moves he made. He sat Perry, he sat his starting netminder Skinner. He called that timeout in Game 7 against the Vancouver Canucks when all of a sudden it looked like Vancouver was getting back into it. Let's keep in mind too, this guy didn't have a training camp with his team. I mean, he came in 11, 12 games into the season, and he's installed his system, and the guys are buying in, and they're playing the best hockey of the season right now when it matters most. So I give him a ton of credit, because coming into that situation was not very easy, and right now, very wise move by Ken Holland, GM in Edmonton.
All right, when you're breaking down these two teams, we've gone through a lot of the conventional ones. How about the intangibles? I don't even know what they are, so you tell me what the intangible might be in this series and who you would give the edge to.
Some people talk about home ice. I think home ice gets thrown out, especially in the finals. I look at something like a battle between an Evander Kane, if he's totally healthy, and Keith Tkachuk, because they did have battles back in the 2022 season, and this was Matthew Tkachuk. This was the Battle of Alberta, Calgary against the Calgary against the Edmonton Oilers, and he was actually asking if he needed some money, because Evander Kane went through some issues where he was short a little bit of money, went through bankruptcy hearing, and they had a battle royale through that whole series. It just went 5 games. A lot of people think that Evander Kane got the better in that series. He kind of neutralized Matthew Tkachuk, which not many players were able to do. So if there's one thing I'm going to be watching outside of the superstars, is the battle between Kane and Tkachuk.
He's right. There's so many games within the game that you're looking forward. And to me, and I'm going to say the same thing I said before the Ranger series. If Florida gets their forecheck game going like they have all year, and Edmonton has a tough time breaking the puck out, and they got to play in D zone against those forwards, I think this is definitely a Florida series. But on the contrary, if Edmonton does a really good job of slowing them down through the neutral zone and they break the puck out easy, and then McDavid's speed and the rest of the speed, because it's not just McDavid, backs off the Florida D, I think Edmonton can stay in this series and have success.
There's so many different, like you said, games within the game. Special teams, too, the way the Oilers are rolling on the power play, 37%, PK, 94%. We'll see. It's going to be a fun series, at least on paper. We'll see how it plays.